currently live in Canberra, Australia, as you see here. Canberra is often described as a city in a park. Seems like a great place to live. Who wouldn't want to live in a park? And yet, a lot of Australians really dislike Canberra. And it always puzzled me how a place which I love living in can be just despised by so many people from the country. And if you look at indicators, and a lot of indicators have been done to look at well-being, you can see that there's actually a lot of differences with what contributes to people's well-being. And there's actually quite a few indicators that have been used around the world. They're usually categorized into 3 types. One is those that adjust GDP in some way. So gross domestic product, I'll talk about the problems in a second, but they take and try to fix it in some way. The second category is those that do life satisfaction surveys. So they basically try to ask people how their well-being is. Usually it's in the form of life satisfaction and direct questions of, on a 0 to 10 scale, what is the satisfaction with your overall life? And then the third are composite. So those can be various subjective indicators, like the life satisfaction survey, or objective indicators. And it puts them together in different ways. So why don't we use any of these? Well, as you've heard today, our progress is most often measured through GDP these days, gross domestic product. So 3 major problems of gross domestic product is that 1, it considers everything as positive. For example, a hurricane hits or a cyclone or there's an earthquake. GDP goes up. Who would say that's actually a good thing for society? Cancer, diseases, GDP loves them, right? It goes up, it grows. Nobody would actually say they're a good thing. The other thing it misses is it misses a lot of important work that should be valued, but it isn't. Volunteer work, for example, is a huge indicator of social cohesion, and yet GDP doesn't care. It misses a parent staying home to watch their kid or to school their kid, but GDP doesn't care. So it misses a lot of things too. And it misses also inequality. GDP doesn't care whether one person owns everything in the world, all the money, or 8 people, as Oxfam showed, own 50%, or whether it's equally distributed. So there are a lot of issues. So this is an indicator called Genuine Progress Indicator, and Vala talked about earlier today. This is from a study done of 17 countries that made up the majority of the global population and the majority of the global GDP. And it shows that around 1978, GDP kept going up. This is GDP per capita, while GPI per capita leveled off. And you can see what Herman Daly calls economic growth and uneconomic growth. And this means that as GDP keeps growing, those negative things that GDP counts as positive exceed a lot of the other stuff. And we found that the 2 major things, the 2 major costs that GDP counts as positive that it shouldn't, is 1, the cost of inequality, and 2, the cost of environmental degradation. So let's talk about inequality for a second. This is from a book by Richard Wilkinson and Kate Pickett called The Spirit Level. And it shows on the x-axis income inequality, and on the y-axis it has an health and social problems basically. And you could see the list on the right. I'm not going to go through it, but it's a pretty good correlation, right? Okay, what do you think will happen if we change the x-axis to GDP, to income? Think in your head what think will happen. Got it? Is that what you expected? There's no correlation. There's no correlation between national income per person and a lot of these health issues. Okay? And so income inequality is super important within our society, and yet we haven't addressed it in most societies. The other problem with income inequality is that a lot of people don't perceive it. So I like to actually start talking about it through the middle column. So this was a study done on about 5,000 Americans out of the Harvard Business School, which asked people what they think inequality is like in the US. This was Republicans, Democrats, young, old, black, white, Hispanic. It did really well in sort of crossing the spectrum of the US. And it asked them what they thought it was, which is that middle bar, what they would like it to be. And they would like it actually to be a lot more equal than what they even thought it was. And the top is what it actually is. And so people don't actually perceive how bad inequality is. So numbers like Oxfam released, where 8 people own 50% of the global wealth, a lot of people just don't perceive that. And then there's the environmental problems. So this is by Tim Lenton, and it's a map of the tipping points around the Earth. So things like the Amazon rainforest, which is currently burning, right? The boreal forest. If any of those disappeared, it'd be a huge tipping point in the Earth system. The Indian summer monsoons, the boreal forests, the tropical coral reef, which is probably going to disappear in the next 5 to 10 years at this rate. So there's a lot of things going on, and there's a lot of tipping points that we are approaching and will approach faster if we are not careful. And I just want to kind of close off on a final point. So this was, we've been doing a lot of work around subjective well-being. So it's that second group of indicators that I showed. And with the second group of indicators, you ask people directly about life satisfaction. So what is your satisfaction in life? 0 to 10 scale. And we asked this is a survey that's been going on in Australia since 2000. They interview about 30,000 Australians a year. And one of the questions they ask is exactly that. What is your satisfaction with your life? But then they also ask a lot of other questions. And we were able to take those and see if we could correlate any of the objective indicators with life satisfaction. And we found something interesting, that although we looked at a pretty fine resolution, we looked at about a few hundred people at a time, we found that there are groupings of what people actually care about and what contributes to their well-being. So you can see in the top right, for example, age. People that are older actually are happier. A lot of people retire in that area too. People that, for example, the bottom pink purple shows relationship and kids. So what we correlated is people that have good relationships and kids have a higher life satisfaction. Infrastructure, bottom pink. A lot of mines exist in that area. So infrastructure is important. Employment at the top. That's where a lot of the Aboriginal community lives. And there's a big issue with employment in that region. And so you could see that depending on who you are and where you live, what is most important to your well-being or life satisfaction does change. So, and these are the references used in this paper, and you can find a lot of these papers on the website. So thank you.